So listen to this clip.
Hello, Ian. Long time no see.
Mr. Pigden. You're alive.
I'm alive, he says. How are you doing?
I can't believe it. Someone said you was dead.
As you see, I'm very much in, and I'm so glad you've done so well with yourself.
I don't know what to say.
Ah,
God, I can't believe it. I can't believe it.
Ian Wright never played in a football academy. At 19, he was in jail, and at 21, he had given up football. But somehow, at 22, he had signed for a second division club. By 25, he debuted in the Premier League. At 28, he finally signed for a top club. By 31, he was a Ballon d'Or nominee. And finally, at 33, he was Arsenal's all-time top scorer, banging in goals at a higher rate than even Thierry Henry, becoming a certified Premier League legend with fans demanding a statue be built in front of their stadium. And still, that clip of Ian at 42 years old hugging his middle school teacher in tears after years thinking he was dead is the first thing you should show your kids once they ask you about Ian Wright. That man, that teacher, was the one who set it all in motion. Look, Ian Wright claims he was never once hugged as a child. At 18 months, his dad abandoned him, and once alone with an alcoholic mom, well, one of his first memories was her yelling that she wished she had him aborted. Then, at 5 years of age, they moved in with his stepfather, who not only gambled his wages away, but was violent with everyone in that house, though for a reason he was never able to figure out, Ian was his favorite target. Love was such a foreign concept for him that he grew up believing that they weren't his real parents, that one day someone would knock on the door and come for him. So when no one came, he was the one who left the house. He'd spent every waking hour playing football in the street with his older brother, who'd rag on him so hard, telling him that he sucked at it, that his left foot was useless, that he couldn't even head the ball, that Ian became obsessive. So, almost like a Karate Kid training montage, he obsessed over one skill after the other, and before he even knew it, his brother had made him into a complete player. Football had become his whole world, his only escape, so his stepfather tried to take that from him too. Listen, the one thing that got Ian and his brother to come back in the house was Match of the Day, a TV show highlighting the best football moments of the week, and his stepfather had no real reason to take that from them, but as Ian explained, it forced us to turn our backs against the TV just as it started, with face to wall the whole time. What made it so cruel was that I could still hear it. My brother would have to cover my ears so that the sounds of football would stop torturing me. Once I began playing, I had so much pent-up anger that if I was losing, I'd spoil the game for everyone else. It felt like someone was taking football away from me again, so I'd snap. And that's where Mr. Pigden, the teacher, came in. At 8 years of age, Ian could barely read or write because he was always being kicked out of class. In fact, that's how they met. Mr. Pigden walked by and saw him standing outside over and over again until one day, he pretty much adopted Ian as his very own little assistant. In Ian's words, he taught me everything, not just how to read or write, but how to be patient, confident, and why I was always so angry. Even in football, he noticed I'd blast the ball into the net every time, so he taught me to be more calm. He said to me, "Jimmy Greaves doesn't do that. He passes the ball into the net." He was the first man to ever show me any love. It changed everything for me. In fact, decades later, Ian would become the new presenter of Match of the Day, the show that he wasn't even allowed to watch. The day he first stepped on set, he just broke down crying. Still, back then, eventually, Ian was forced to move schools to leave Mr. Pigden behind, and age 15, he quit school completely, ran away from home, began working and playing for Sunday league clubs, while going on trial after trial, desperate to join any football academy, but it never worked. By 19, after 8 years of failed attempts, as he said, I'd begged, borrowed and stolen for every favor I needed in order to travel from my home in London to Brighton for this trial, but after a month, When his teammates told him he could ask the club for a bit of money just so he could go back to London to see his family, he went to their offices, asked a lady at the desk, and sat waiting. As he told it, "I sat there for 5 hours, no books, no TV, nothing, just waiting for something to happen, totally powerless, hoping that someone would notice me, notice how hard I was training, how far I traveled, how long I was willing to wait." But no one did. It was only after first team captain Steve Foster asked him what he was doing there that they finally saw him. Ian heard him shout, "How could you do this to this poor boy?" And a few minutes later, they handed him £200 and he got on the train home and bursted into tears. No offer, yet again, and less than a year later, he was caught driving without insurance and not able to pay the fine. He landed in jail for 14 days and decided, "I can't live my life like this." So, with a girlfriend, a son, and another on the way, he found a steady job at a refinery and gave up on football in favor of another dream: to be a good, honest, hardworking father. Regardless, by 21, he had watched his childhood friend David Rocastle, 3 years younger than him, rise all the way up to the Arsenal first team, while Ian, after so much rejection, was content with playing part-time for £30 a week at Greenwich Borough in the 9th Division, no matter how often David told him that, "You're better than all these players I see in training," to the point that, even once his manager repeatedly called up some people over at Crystal Palace, convincing them to send over a scout, he got offered a trial and rejected it, then rejected it again, and then a third time, insisting he didn't have the luxury of taking time off for some trial, that he couldn't take another no. It was only after one of his co-workers went ahead and talked to his supervisors, convincing him to find some kind of excuse to get him off work for 2 weeks, that he finally accepted. At the trial, he claims he nearly blew it, that he was almost acting like he didn't care, trying not to set himself up for disappointment, but that wasn't what the coaches saw. As one said, with Ian, what would take years to be taught in an academy had seemingly come to him out of thin air, but even then, when they called him up to a trial by fire, a game behind closed doors, he got there early, not believing he had a proper shot, but after 45 minutes struggling to find his teammates, he asked a woman walking by if she knew where the game was, and realized he was not at the club's football grounds, but at their athletics track 2 miles away. He ran like his life depended on it, got there drenched in sweat, apologized all he could, and somehow by the end of that match, the manager Steve Coppell pulled him to the side and told him they wanted to extend the trial for a few more weeks. But again, Ian rejected it, said he couldn't afford to lose his job, and thank God. Then, Steve Coppell called up their director, told him, "This will sound stupid, but I think this random kid could play for England one day." And so, with the club being pretty much broke, supposedly unable to afford any real players, they offered him a contract. It was nothing, £100 a week, only 3 months long, in one of the worst second-tier clubs of the time. Even his transfer fee was actually just some second-hand gym equipment they gave his old club. But after 11 years of rejection, once Ian walked away, he was in tears. He was finally a professional footballer. Regardless, things weren't easy. The older players were awful. They mocked his accent. In training, they slapped and kicked him around. They kept telling him a Sunday League player didn't belong there. At one point, noticing that he didn't know what knife and fork to use at their hotel and telling him that, "When have you ever had a steak? I bet you can even spell it." It was so bad, Ian started having dinner by himself in his room. But by the end of the season, even without breaking into the starting 11, he was their second highest goal scorer, a fan favorite nicknamed the Super Sub, and with that anger again beginning to brew, by his third season he hit 23 goals, more than any Palace player in 28 years, and by the fourth, with most of these old players gone, he was up to 33, the club's highest tally since the 1930s. Suddenly, Palace were up to third in the table, but still 1 point off the automatic promotion spots. They were forced into the dreaded playoffs, 4 teams fighting for 1 spot at the top tier. So, of course, Ian Wright refused to take his foot off the pedal. After losing the first semi-final match, he came back to score the volley that put them in the final, and once there, after another first-leg defeat put them down 3-1, as he said, "Everybody knew what needed to be done, so I went out and did it." Showing up 17 minutes into the second leg to edge the ball right over the goal line, setting Palace up for a comeback and sending the game into extra time, where, with 3 minutes left, Ian Wright headed it in, causing one of the the all-time greatest pitch invasions. By the final play, there were dozens of people standing inside the goal as the keeper tried to take his kick, and once the final whistle was sounded, they were lifting Ian up in the air, wrestling to get a touch on him like he was goddamn Superman, almost ripping his shirt off of his body. Palace were back to the top after 80 years, and Ian Wright, the Sunday League footballer, was now their player of the season and their king, and there were still cards up his sleeve. When Ian broke his leg in January, it wouldn't have been a surprise if he had gone out for the season, but once he came back and broke it again, everyone assumed it was over, even Ian. That was, at least, until he watched Palace miraculously beat Liverpool in the FA Cup semi-final. Once he heard that final whistle, his leg was the least of his worries. He just ran into the pitch celebrating, and that day, no matter how many times they told him you can't risk it, he decided that if I got half a chance to play in something I dreamed of all my life, no one can tell me anything. He went against everyone's advice, and once they lined up against Man United, he had convinced them to put them at least on the bench, and no matter what, after 70 minutes, with his team behind 2-1, they subbed him in, and 3 minutes later he dropped one defender, then one more, and sent the game into extra time, where, again, just 3 minutes in, a ball was launched into the box and feet first, he smacked it in. For the next 20 minutes, he lived his biggest dream. He was the hero in an FA Cup final, but then Mark Hughes leveled the game, forcing them into a rematch, and in Ian's own words, back then, Man United didn't give anyone a second chance to beat them. You got one shot only. Regardless, in the space of 2 hours, his notoriety had skyrocketed. There were people showing up to his mom's house asking for autographs. There were rumors of a World Cup call-up, and even if that didn't happen, soon he got his debut, getting Mr. Pigden, not just a teacher, but a decorated pilot, a lieutenant in World War II, to tell him that his proudest moment ever was watching Ian put on the England shirt. Nothing is ever bigger than that. However, Ian still wasn't satisfied. Even once he led Palace to a third-place finish, it wasn't enough. He needed that cup win. So the following season, in the Full Members' Cup, he scored the winner in extra time against Brighton to lead them to the semis, scored 2 there to make the final of the Northern Area, and once they drew the first leg, he scored again to lead them back to Wembley, where, in extra time, he scored 2 more to finally take the trophy. 26 goals in all competitions, playing for Palace in England's top division. That just didn't happen. Ultimately, it would be what would lead their fans to vote him as their player of the century, and regardless of whether he was 28, those who paid attention knew there was still time. So the next season, Arsenal came calling, and as always, Ian didn't want to move, but they were willing to break their club record for his signing, and with Rocastle urging him to come, he said yes. Suddenly, his house looked like Don Corleone's wedding. Even his biological dad creeped out of the woodwork asking for money to open a restaurant. In the media, everyone questioned why they were breaking records to sign some Sunday League player on a purple patch when they had guys like Alan Smith and Kevin Campbell. Coming up on his debut, Ian was so nervous he stayed up till 5 a.m. talking to David Rocastle, and his instructions were simple: score goals and score a lot of them. So the next day, Ian Wright opened things up with a hat-trick. Then, most important of all, Rocastle said, score against Tottenham. So 2 months later, he did just that. Then, the game after, he scored 4, and faster than anyone could have imagined, he had the crowd chanting his name, Ian Wright, Wright, Wright. At 10 more goals over the next few months, and with 1 game left in the season, Gary Lineker, Tottenham's star player, was at the top of the goal scorers table with 1 goal more than Ian. So first, he scored to go level, then Lineker snatched back the lead in the 88th minute, and with only 2 minutes left in the season, someone must have warned Ian, because instantly he took the ball in midfield, went past everyone, and scored to tie it all up again. But the worst, in injury time he made it a hat-trick and took the golden boot all for himself. Now, there were Nike billboards all around the country with a message: behind every great goalkeeper, there's a ball from Ian Wright. But though he'd be Arsenal's top scorer for every single one of the next 6 seasons, this was where some things stopped going his way. Ian was not called up to the 1992 Euros. They took Lineker, who was off playing in Japan, a washed-up Alan Smith and a 20-year-old Alan Shearer, but not him. And once back at Arsenal, the board shocked everyone by selling off David Rocastle, and then, more than ever, they had become one of the most boring clubs in the country. It was the era of the 1-0 to the Arsenal. By the end of the season, they were 10th place in the league, and hadn't it been for Ian scoring 30 goals, carrying them to the League Cup and then the double with 10 goals in 7 matches, 2 of them in the final to take the FA Cup, they'd have come out of that year empty-handed, and the next year was just more of the same. Not only did England end up missing out on qualification to the World Cup for the first time in 16 years, but in the Cup Winners' Cup with Arsenal, Ian scored the winner in the first round, a brace in the last 16, and after missing most of the quarters, he scored a decisive away goal that put them in the final, but this time, one misjudged sliding tackle earned him a suspension. So, of course, now with an even higher tally of 35 goals to his name and no World Cup to be played, once Ian was forced to close out his season by watching his teammates lift Arsenal's first major international trophy while he sat out the match, he instantly knew he had to make up for it. So, the next year, he started things up with a streak of 12 matches scoring across all competitions, while in the Cup Winners' Cup, he started scoring and just didn't stop. Ian didn't just score in every round, he scored in every match, home or away, all the way up to the final. But once they were ready to be named back-to-back European champions, a last-minute goal in extra time sent them back home, and with a 12th place finish in the league, even with Ian up to 30 goals yet again, George Graham was sacked, Bruce Rioch came in, and look, every player hated the guy. He was often described as a dictator, but as you may imagine, Ian Wright hated him more than anyone. Before preseason ended, he was already handing in a transfer request, and though that was denied, even with the arrival of Bergkamp, Wright's greatest ever partner, even with a Ballon d'Or nomination at the end of the year, even with his rivalry with Cantona in full flow, as Ian famously cut out the collars of his shirt, some say to provoke him, Arsenal went completely trophyless. Ian finally missed out on the 30-goal mark, and in exchange, he was again left out of the 1996 Euros, forever insisting that it was his destiny to have come off the bench and saved them in that semi-final against Germany. But well, at least thanks to that god-awful season, Arsene Wenger arrived. With a big man by his side, even at 33, Ian hit 30 in a season yet again, finishing just 2 goals off of another Golden Boot and managing to score against 17 out of the 19 teams in the league in a single year, the all-time record. But that was nothing. 6 games into the following season, Ian scored against Bolton to become Arsenal's all-time top scorer, celebrating by showing off a shirt reading 179, just done it. Except, he had not. That was his 178th goal. Hilariously, he had mixed up his numbers and celebrated too soon, but thankfully 5 minutes later, it finally came. One more made it a hat-trick, and by December, he had gotten another Ballon d'Or nomination. But still, in January, he ruptured his hamstring, and being 34 already, he was pretty much out for the season, out for the FA Cup final, out for the World Cup yet again, and though at least he did get to step on the pitch to lift what would be his first and only Premier League title, with Anelka blossoming in his absence, it was also the end of his time at Arsenal. He still tried to keep things up, first at West Ham, then Nottingham Forest, Burnley and Celtic, but it didn't go so well, and by the year 2000, being denied of a call-up to the Euros, he retired with 33 international caps, meaning that virtually no player in history ever got as many without getting to play in a proper tournament.